Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Quantrics Planning for Good webcast series. My name is Tom Ahern, and I'm the account manager for Quantrics based up here in beautiful Portland, Maine. But for today, it's my pleasure to be your moderator for this event. All right, so let's just review briefly our agenda for today. Of course, it'll be our feature presentation by our guest speaker, Rich Holohan, and his team of Ryan Goodall and Stephen Bonacci from Logistics Capital and Strategy. We'll have a brief overview about Quantrix by Brad Hopper, our general manager. And I'll give a brief description of our Planning for Good program. And we'll follow that up with a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Brendan Donahue, our marketing associate. And then we'll wrap up the webinar with some final thoughts and a call to action. All right, so let's get to the fun part. Today's special guest has been a Quantrix user and client since 2011, at least, when he founded LCS. He has built a profitable and thriving business practice around supply chain solutions that now employs over 15 business strategists and investment bankers. Their unique fusion of analytical firepower, deep industry expertise, and seasoned judgment generates long-term value for clients in all segments of the transportation and logistics value chain. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's special guest, Rich Holohan and his team from Logistics Capital and Strategy. Take it away, Rich.
Thanks very much, Tom. Appreciate the kind words and the introduction. As Tom said, Logistics Capital and Strategy has been around for 10 years and really was outgrowth of an earlier firm called Merge Global, which was founded in 1992. So we've been around for almost 30 years now, and we're a management consulting company. We are focused in the transportation and logistics sector. And we actually, I think we're first, when I first had a CD-ROM of the Quantrix software sitting on my desk and, popped it into the computer out of curiosity. That sort of dates, how long we've been Quantrix users for. But I think it was around 2007 or so when we first picked it up. So we're longtime users and adherents to and big fans of the Quantrix platform. If you flip to the next slide, I'll give a brief overview of LogCapStrat and kind of who we are, what we do, and then I'll turn it over to Stephen to talk through an example of how we use Quantrix in the ecosystem of tools that we bring to bear on for the good of our clients. And then Ryan Goodall will walk through another example, a recent example of how we've used Quantrix in a client application. So first, LogCapStrat is, as Tom said, it's led by Brian Clancy and myself. We're the two partners at Logistics Capital and Strategy. Brian actually formed the predecessor firm, as I said, in 1992, and then LogCapStrat in 2011. We're Washington, D.C. based, but we have folks located all across the United States, some international locations as well. We're D.C. based and have about 15 or 20 combination of employees and principal advisors that we use on consulting projects based on the expertise needed for that engagement. We have, our expertise is in business strategy and financial analysis. We've spent again almost 30 years helping clients develop business unit strategy and then corporate strategy. We take distinct approaches there, but we take a very quantitative approach, very fact-based approach, and are we think pretty good at pulling together, the essential data and facts needed to map out a strategy for transportation or logistics provider. We do industry research. We often put together a forecast or an outlook for the industry's demand drivers. So we put together macro forecasts that capture cyclical declines and recoveries. That is, clear that was a big part of what we did in 08, 09 during that downturn, and more recently, that's become, as Stephen and Ryan will talk about, that's been a topic of great interest among our clients. We do a fair amount of work in valuation, looking at the range of valuation techniques, from more theoretical discounted cash flow analysis to the very practical M&A comps and market assessment of how a firm will trade. On the right-hand side here, we apply this expertise to the transportation logistics sector. So we tend to stay, we're pretty broad in terms of the expertise that we can bring to bear in a situation, but we do stick to our knitting and focus our effort in the transportation logistics sector. We span the full sector. We focus on freight transportation, but that will range from over-the-road trucking, LTL, intermodal, rail, ocean and air freight. We sort of cover the gamut in terms of the sectors within the transportation sector that we cover. If we flip to the next slide, you'll see sort of the obligatory wall of logos of firms that we've worked with over the last 30 years. I think what's distinct about this, or what's important about this is not a list of a wall of logos of firms that our company has, or someone at our company has at some point worked with. Brian or I have worked personally on every one of these projects, every one of these for every one of these clients, and so it's real expertise, it's real experience, and it's pretty broad based within the transportation sector. So that ends the advertising portion of this presentation. I'm going to pass it over to Stephen, and he will walk through a recent application, a recent engagement that we had, in which Quantrix was a core tool that we used to deliver the outcome for the client. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Rich. So any business wants to understand the profitability behind what their day-to-day is doing. And oftentimes with a regular day-to-day business, a non-network business, some of those feedback loops are fairly normal and consistent. But networks add a layer of complexity, making it a unique problem. There's a shared set of resources, activities, and financial data that all have to be analyzed and commingled to drive actionable recommendations. And so, generally speaking, our clients want to understand their network's profit. And not only that, but they want to understand the costs and the resource variables behind what makes parts of their network more profitable or less profitable than other parts of their network. The solution to identifying those areas is broadly termed an activity-based cost model. And it's an approach that we take and have deployed across the sector, as Rich kind of outlined earlier, where we are able to take the different component parts of the network and break them down into individual drivers of cost. And that in turn will give us a comprehensive view of profit for the network. So really what we're trying to do is fill in any of the unquantified areas that allow for management to take decisive action on either a sales or an operations question. So most frequently we have to identify the pockets of profit within the network, check that the activity is consistently unprofitable, and then take action to adjust that unprofitable network activity. And in turn, that will trigger another series of questions or more informed decisions that really kind of repeat the cycle. So in order to assess a network's profitability, we have to first start with the building blocks. Those building blocks are most commonly the resource data. So what are the different physical units that the network has available to them? So facilities, trucks, trains, you name it. Activity data, which is most commonly operations data. So where did a truck go to? Where did a shipment go to? And then finally, the financial data. So what was our P&L? When we marry these three things together, then we're able to apply unit costs in a network profitability model that then can recommend actions. And the key thing here is that without the scalability of a network profitability model, you're not really getting down to the core units of what's transiting your network. So in order to build that network profitability model, you have to have a robust tool available to you and deployed across the entire business segment. So most commonly, our team uses a variety of pretty specialized tools to actually put a client's data through this pipeline. So really what we're talking about is using SQL and Excel for some data storage. And then we end up using Python commonly to manipulate the data and massage it for the downstream analysis. Most typically we see that data, and especially network data, isn't always 100% clean. So we try and do our best to clean it up. Then the key link here is really the Quantrix model. And what Quantrix provides our team is agile modeling of a multidimensional problem, which is exactly what we have in a network. We have resources, activities, and financial data that we have to marry together in unison. And so the fluid design there creates an immediate feedback loop, not only for us, but for the end user as well as a client. And it enables us not only to do an immediate feedback loop, but it also enables rapid prototyping and scalability that's not really traditional or available in more traditional tabular tools. So whereas Excel might be able to handle a few 100,000 or million rows of data, Quantrix can handle much more and much more heavy computations. Lastly, to then take the network profitability models that we build, we want to visualize that output. And most commonly, we use Tableau for that. So on a recent engagement, we used Quantrix to really deliver the insight on the customer lane profitability and analyze the unit cost by lane, origin, and destination. So as we saw on the previous slide, usually what we have is disparate data sources. So in this case, we had about 21 data sources that we brought together into one coherent Quantrix model. That model was built at the most granular level and the least subjective, which was at the shipment. So a shipment comes in, it has some weight and it has some cube attributes to it, and that's essentially non-negotiable. So once we have that data, that is our unit that transits the network. Then we took a income statement and we derived a set of unit costs for the shared set of resources and the network activity. So this is really key to the methodology and approach here, which is breaking down the network into distinct activities. Then within those activities, we identify the related costs that trigger a shipment level unit driver. And then finally, we analyze the relative unit costs to network averages and best in class. So really what we're doing is we're breaking down the fundamental cost components of the various parts of the network and trying to identify where we might be above average, below average, making money, saving money. When we apply those unit costs to shipment, we're then able to aggregate to a customer or a lane level. And this is really important because it summarizes a vast amount of data. The profitability, because we're building it at the shipment level and then we're aggregating to a higher level, is not obscured by modeling of aggregate shipments. And with Quantrix in particular, the model really provided auditability to specific transactions, activities, costs, and revenue. So without further ado, we'll jump into one of the examples of our models. This is one of the perspectives that we built for the client. And in this perspective, what we're really illustrating here was one derivation of unit costs at a value chain level in the top left, the application of those unit costs to shipments as they transited the network in the bottom left, and then finally a shipment's P&L on the right-hand side here. So the neat thing with Quantrix for us was, in this unique scenario, there were about 21 different resources, in this case facilities, that we had to model, each with an individual P&L that was monthly in nature. So we had to break down the costs into their fixed and variable components, identify the activity units which drove those costs, and then derive a cost per unit. Now, whereas in Excel, you might have to actually have a formula for each individual cell, Quantrix is unique in that we actually only needed 3 different formulas here to derive our unit costs, and that was to define what the costs were and where they were coming from, define the activity units and where they were coming from, and then finally the cost per unit as the cost divided by the activity units. So again, whereas you would have had to do this individually or cell by cell, we were able to do it with 3 different formulas succinctly for the entire network across the entire time period. Then when we took those unit costs from the top line here, we could apply them to an individual shipment. So we understand that shipments in this case transited multiple shared resources, and we wanted to make sure that they absorbed costs for each resource that they transited. So in this case, we were able to marry unit costs with the specific facilities and shipments as they transited the network, and then break those costs down into different components of costs. So in this case, the client had identified actually 9 different segments of fixed costs and 1 segment of variable costs. And that's how they wanted to see the P&L basically stated for a shipment. And this was interesting because the fixed costs, the breakdown of those 9 different components was actually something that was asked of us pretty late in the process. And so with Quantrix, what we were able to do was rapidly prototype this and deploy it in the model. Whereas, again, a traditional method, it could have taken a week, if not more, of rebuild. So Quantrix really afforded us flexibility and agility to what the client had asked for there. Finally, probably the most interesting view here and the one that drives the most output is our shipment level P&L. So as a shipment transits the network, there's revenue, rebates, variable and fixed costs. Here we can see how those different revenue sources break down, how the different rebates break down, the variable costs and the fixed costs respectively. And this is really important because we did this at scale. So we're only showing 1 shipment ID here. But if we were to open the drop-down tray here, you would see many, many more. In fact, for this model in particular, I believe there was in excess of 500,000 different shipments that were transiting the network. So again, the rapid prototyping and the agility of Quantrix really enabled us to roll this model out and develop it quickly, and then scale it to the entire network once we had clearly defined what it was that we were looking for. With that, I will turn the baton over to Ryan.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. So while Stephen, there just talked about looking backwards, right, at a network and seeing how performance went, historically. My use case is in a forward-looking sense. We were working with a $2 billion transportation company that had 10 plus different business units. Were all sort of different, very different. They're different end markets, different revenue streams, and COVID came along, and management needed to measure the impact of earnings during a downturn when things could practically go to zero. How does that impact earnings? And the company, as I said, they had 10 plus different business units. Each business unit had 3 to 5 different revenue streams within there. Right away, you're talking about 50 different P&Ls for 1 month at a time. And within each revenue stream, there's a variety of different cost structures. So modeling that right away is a challenge, regardless of what tool you're going to be using when you're thinking long term in a 6 to 12 to 18, 24 month scenario building. And at the time, the FP&A team had an enterprise accounting software and Excel as their primary resources to solve this problem. But by using Quantrix, we were able to add value in scaling the ability of this forecast across the 10 different business units with those various different revenue streams, for 6 to 18 months through time. And we were able to do that for each revenue stream with their unique cost structure, right? So each business unit that served a different end market, we were able to narrow down to the unique cost structure for that revenue stream end market, and then aggregate upwards to the business unit from the revenue streams, and then into the consolidated business unit. And then finally, we were able to produce multiple scenarios for the management team. How do we get there? We forecast profitability by starting with the activities within a business unit, focusing from each individual revenue stream what their activity is, the unit cost per activity, the revenue per activity, to come up with an earnings forecast, right? And we do this right at the revenue stream level for each business unit, then aggregate to the business unit and bring that up to the consolidated level, which allows for high level of granularity when we're thinking about the accuracy of the forecast. How do we get to the different unit costs and metrics? As Stephen had alluded to earlier, we use a lot of different tools at LCS to manipulate data and get the data into the best possible shape so that the number for the unit cost is the most accurate representation of the business driver, right? And for that, we do a lot of data manipulation within SQL and other tools as well. For this model specifically, we have 4 primary data sources that you can see here on the left in this visualization. We have a live view of data that comes through the transportation data warehouse that we use, and we take the historical data, the historical accounting data, and then the budgeted data as well. With the historical activity and accounting data, we're able to generate ratios, right, for unit costs. And from those ratios, we're able to extrapolate forward projected earnings, right? And we do this first looking at, what's going on today in the business through the live view of activity, and have revenue stream level profitability analysis of the day-to-day activities that are going on within each business. And this is something that's pretty unique to Quantrix by having the live connection to the data warehouse that we wouldn't really be able to do in most other software or modeling tools as well. And then when we look beyond the forecast or current period and we go into the forecast, we're able to provide different scenarios through Quantrix's dimensionally modeling tool, have our scenario waterfall produce bear, bull recovery cases that are done at scale and ultimately can be summarized in an income statement. The scenarios, as we were just talking about there, we were able to produce about 9 different scenarios in this use case for management. And the key point that I like to make here is that when we were looking at these scenarios, the scale and speed that Quantrix gave us really allowed us to think through the scenarios and refine the most iterative and granular view that we thought was the case for the bear bull recovery patterns. And that in the end, what that did is that translated to confidence for not only us when we were giving our results to the management team, but also to the management team when they were able to make decisions and assign probabilities to the various different scenarios that we had produced as well. And that time that Quantrix gave us to think about that was time that we would have been spent replicating different workbooks in Excel, aggregating the different scenarios to compare them. In Quantrix, we were able to do this all in one platform, see the different outcomes in one space on one page, as I'll show in a second, and really provide rapid scenario development. So here's our main workspace in the financial model. As you can see, we have a main canvas that's summary level P&L with some activity drivers at the bottom. On the right, we have different key metric charts that we're tracking, scenario comparisons right between the two different charts as well. And Stephen had mentioned with the dimensionality factor of Quantrix, we can switch between different business units. So right here we have Unit 3 is on the screen, but we have over 13 different, 14 plus business units here that we can flip between. And each business unit is different, right? They have different size. They have, and from revenue and cost structures and market clients, as we said, and you can see how different scenarios impact them. In this, our scenario dimension here, we can produce another scenario essentially with by just clicking enter, and then adding in our assumptions there. So here we can start to hit the V shape. We can flip back to the U, to the subvertical, and see does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And quickly make a decision on that. And the time that Quantrix saves us and enables us to provide more value, thinking about what's driving this downturn or what could drive the upturn is really valuable, not just to us but to our clients and to ultimately to the decisions that they make. So with that, I think I'm giving it back to Brad.
Hey Ryan, I would just add one thing if I could. Brad, just jump in before you here. Just 2 high level kind of observations that in our experience with Quantrix, and I think that Stephen and Ryan did a fantastic job of using two recent examples, recent engagements that where Quantrix really played a central role. The first is we're free agent. There is no bureaucracy, there is no sort of tyranny of IT at our consulting firm. We're a small consulting firm, and we adopt and use best of breed tools to solve the problems. So as Stephen was describing, our tool set really revolves around SQL, Python, Quantrix, Tableau, and I see sort of Excel and PowerPoint as necessary evils. Useful in their place, but not the optimized tool in many cases. The gap that Quantrix fills for us is the modeling gap. Modeling is such a key concept here, because which Excel does a great job of. It just doesn't do a great job at scale. What Ryan was describing there, 10 business units, each with 4 or 5 revenue streams. Already you're up to 50 P&Ls, and now someone says, "Hey, show me another scenario." Well, now you're at 100, and then they say, "Hey, give me one more scenario, because what if this happens?" Now you're at 150. Excel can't handle that. It's not in any practical way, and Quantrix really allows us to fills that gap for us. The other tools we use, Tableau is just very good at displaying data. It's horrible at modeling. I mean, you could kind of do it, but it would be the wrong tool. Excel can do smallish models, but once you get past a certain scale, you just outgrow Excel. SQL you can do stuff in, but it's not an ideal. It's a great place to store data. It's just not a great place to model data, and it's not accessible to most business users. You have to read a lot of code to understand how the data is being manipulated. And the same is true of Python. Python's terrific, very powerful, very fast, very flexible, and a relatively easy programming language to learn, but again, not accessible to the average business user. So each of them have their place in our ecosystem, in our value chain, but Quantrix has a very important role and place there, and it's often sort of at the center of the work we do. Anyway, with that, I'll pass it back to Brad.
Fantastic, Richard. Thanks so much, and thanks to the LogCapStrat team. Actually, those last comments that you made, Rich, are so important. In fact, I was going to cover some of that information in the slides, but it's so much more impactful coming from the mouth of our customer, I guess, than from us. So with that, I'll just give you just a couple of quick things and then dive into the demo, because you've seen a presentation of some very sophisticated models from Stephen and from Ryan, and you may be asking yourself, well, how would I go about building such a thing? And I wanted to just give you a real quick, maybe 10-minute demonstration of how you could start from scratch and get to something pretty sophisticated pretty fast. So just bear with me for 1 minute while I tell you what is Quantrix. Well, Quantrix, as you've inferred in some ways probably by now, is a planning platform, but one that's uniquely agile, that allows the delivery of a completely new kind of modeling approach. Many people, as Rich mentioned, use Excel for modeling, and it's great for small models, but as soon as you try to scale things out, you run into difficulties. I have yet to meet an FP&A professional or an operations professional who doesn't have a spreadsheet-based model that's completely falling apart, and that they spend more time managing the model than actually building scenarios. So what are the characteristics of what you can do with Quantrix? It allows your planners and your modelers to be creative, think outside of the box, but to do so within a very structured environment that allows you to prototype things in a very intuitive way, and essentially build the model as you go, as you're thinking about what you might like to do. As everybody knows, plans change. No more true than today with the COVID scenario. So I think if you are wanting to start from a clean sheet of paper and build a new model, you're not going to go running to that 27 worksheet page Excel spreadsheet in order to think about your options. So Quantrix allows you to explore scenarios, trade off options, and then move from that IP that you've generated, that model, and into a production application that's really easy for the users to benefit from. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, the care and feeding of that model is very, very low. You can make changes and adapt the model to new sets of circumstances and plan new scenarios on the fly with that production application, as opposed to taking it all down and rebuilding it from scratch when you want to add a new distribution center, add a new customer, add a new product line, whatever the case may be. All right, so I'm going to go, in the interest of time, I'm going to switch over here straight to Quantrix and give you a little bit of an introductory demo. So I'm starting here from more or less a clean sheet of paper. I just created a couple of tabs here to kind of help me capture where I wanted to put what for the purposes of the demonstration. And here we have what you might see when you open brand new in Quantrix. I have a blank matrix, and here I have something that we call a category. This one's called category B out of the box. I'm going to call this products. And then within that category, we have a number of items. So I'll go up to this first item here and call this product 1. And then as I hit return, Quantrix automatically serializes those and creates product 1 through 5. I could keep going and create as many as I like. Now I want to also, my goal here is to build a forecast, a simple forecast across multiple products, multiple regions with different growth scenarios in mind. So I'm going to need to enter time as well into this matrix. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this item and put in Q1, hit return a few times all the way up to Q4. And then I'll go over to this category on the far right and call this quarters. So now you can see that rather than starting with an endless number of cells and typing, with no structure someplace, somewhere in that worksheet or cell, universe of cells, Quantrix builds the model as you need it and expands it as you go. Now let me go ahead and put a couple values in here. 19, just put in some dummy data to start with. Now I'd like to summarize, let's say, the sum of the, profit that I'm making from each of these products. So what I can do is add another item and call this total. And you might be tempted to put your formula in here and sum up these numbers. But we know we're going to need to sum up over all of this matrix here. So what we can do, one of the key PowerPoints here, if you will, of Quantrix is that I can hit this item, hit the equal sign, and then say, and assign a formula to that. I'll drag across each of these 5 products. And here you can see that it summarizes not only this column, but all the other columns. Now there's no data yet to do that, but you'll see in a minute how that fills itself in. Similarly, we'll hit return here, year to date, and then equals sum, and I'll scroll across the quarters, and we're done. So now we've created much of the structure here. And you saw that I just made a formula at the level of the item. But we can also build formulas at the level of the category. So I can go here to quarter and hit equals again. Now, what I'd like to do is have the value in each of these quarters depend on the value of the previous quarter. So we have these convenient little iterators or recursion operators, to be more technical. I can put my cursor right here next to quarter, choose this. So this quarter equals, and I'll just use the autocomplete here, quarters previous times 2 and hit return. And now you can see that these are incrementing, are doubling each quarter. Now notice that this formula is actually overlapping the total formula and the year-to-date formula. I don't want that. So I want some way to tell Quantrix to ignore those. Indeed, Quantrix is telling me that this formula is eclipsing the first 2. So I can simply right-click and say insert skips. And the syntax for that is literally skip total, comma, year to date. So now you can see this formula is covering just the cells that we wanted in here. Now, I'd like to add to this matrix the regions. So I can choose this category, hit return, and create a new one for regions. And you can see there's some items up here now that haven't been filled in yet. just for kind of presentation purposes, I'm going to drag the region over to the left, click here and type north, south, oops, got to hit return first, north, south, east, and west. Now, just to, again, to kind of finish up, I'm going to copy and just paste these dummy values into each of these regions, and you can see the matrix is all filled out. Now, once we've got these categories set up like we like, there's a lot we can do. I can take, for example, products and pivot over this way, maybe choose quarters and bring it, quarters and bring it back down. So the structure of the matrix is independent of the way that you visualize the information. Even I can take regions, and I think both Ryan and Steven showed how you can take these categories and allow the user to navigate different parts of the matrix independently like this. So let me just undo a couple times and get back to where we started. Now, right now, my assumption is that each of these regions are going to double every single quarter. Now, that might be great, but I probably that's not realistic. So let me go and enter in some growth rates. So I have already another empty matrix here. I've just labeled this my expected growth rate. And what I'd like to do is establish a growth rate for each of my regions. Now, you might expect that I might have to type in north, south, east, and west again, and then somehow do a VLOOKUP or equivalent to associate those things. But here's another key difference for Quantrix, a fundamental concept of shared categories. If I take regions and drag it over here to the right, you'll see that the system automatically gives me a place to put a value for my expected rate for each of the regions that I have. So I can type 110, 120, 115, 200%. And oh, let me do 110. And then here's where the magic starts to happen, right? If I go and choose this formula and replace this to and just simply click scenarios, hit return, now you'll see that Quantrix has automatically applied the appropriate growth rate to the appropriate region across all of my products. So I think both Ryan and Steven said, just a few formulas get me a long way in Quantrix. So let me do one more thing here. This is kind of a toy example. So I happen to have the actuals data here, and I'm going to make this a bit more of a realistic scenario. So what I'd like to do is associate the actuals Q1 data that I might have gotten from a database extract and put that into this Q1 column here. So first thing is I want to relate the product category and the region category so that I can do that replacement with a formula. Now, if I just drag products, I already have a category called products. So Quantrix will say, hey, you already have one of those. But what I can do is right click and choose link. Now, Quantrix automatically looks for other categories that have the same cardinality in the model. And so it prompts me with the most appropriate value, and I can simply link them right just like that. Now, the last step would be to say Q1 equals, and that creates my formula. And then I just click on Q1 from my actuals, hit return, and you'll see that all of these values now have been added. So now I have a more realistic scenario. And the last thing I'd like to do is to build in the actually the high, medium, and low values of my expected rates. So I can simply click here on expected, hit return, and call this high, return again low. And then low is going to be equal to expected times 0.95, and maybe high equals expected times 1.05. So I've got these values here, and maybe these different scenarios here, expected, high, and low. Maybe you can guess what happens when I take scenario and drag it over to the right. Boom. So now Quantrix has automatically taken all the possible values of high, low, and expected across all the regions, applied them to the entire matrix, and slotted that in for every single product with no lookups, no formulas that I have to drag across anywhere. And it's just, all done for me. Now, if I'm happy with this, I would like to publish this for some other people, maybe the different regional sales managers to interact with this. I can publish this to the cloud. So I would publish, but I've already got it published over here. I'll just flip over, and you can see this is that exact same matrix that I published before we started the webcast. And you can see that it's all dynamic in the same way that it is in the desktop client. I might change this value to 2000 I'm going to really blow out my numbers this year, and you can see how these numbers increase. Now, there's a lot more to say here, but in the interest of time, I'll just say that it's possible to build out sophisticated dashboards that have interactive controls that allow the users to dynamically change those assumptions and parameters to interact with the different visualizations, even create new scenarios in the canvas, such as this. We have very sophisticated security controls so that I might only allow one user to change one set of values for their particular region and so on. So there's a lot to say about how Quantrix scales as a platform to support large enterprises. But I think for now, I will just head back to the slides for a tiny summary, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So I just wanted to point out that what we talked about in the demonstration here covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. We described the multidimensional structure of Quantrix, matrix, categories, items, and cells. I showed you, I guess I didn't call specific attention to it, but showed you how the formulas are applied to the whole matrix, so you don't have to drag and drop them all over the place. And they're in natural language, so it's very, very easy to understand the structure of the model and how the functions apply, the formulas apply across the whole space. We just demonstrated always on pivoting. You can separate the contents of the model from the way you visualize it and manipulate it however you'd like to see it. We showed how dynamically linking relationships across categories makes it really, really fast to create associated assumptions and various values that you want to apply into your formulas. And then we created some parameterized assumptions. We made a scenario with, I guess not quite one click, but just a couple of clicks, drag that onto the main model, and that explodes with all the scenarios, and we can navigate through them however we like. And finally, this piece around cloud collaboration that allows us to share with our constituents, whether that be internal customers or, as in the case of LogCapStrat, external customers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rich, Ryan, Stephen, for your presentations. It's just awesome to see what you've done with Quantrix and the value that you deliver to your customers. And thank you, Brad, for the excellent demonstration of Quantrix. So I just wanted to take a minute to describe our Planning for Good program. There's basically three facets to the Planning for Good. If you're new to Quantrix, we offer you a no-charge license until October 31st. Just to give you, plenty of time to really delve deeply into Quantrix and build truly meaningful models, such as you saw with LCS. Secondly, the Planning for Good webinar series, which we're doing here. We've done two before. We'll show you how business leaders like Rich and the team at LCS, use Quantrix for both their competitive advantage and that of their customers. We've also featured our friends from Lighthouse Foods and the investment bankers from Mishler Financial on previous webcasts, and I encourage you to go up on our website under the resources tab and take a look at those sessions as well. And lastly, we're not forgetting our loyal and awesome customers by making their work from home access to Quantrix easier. So we offer an additional instance of Quantrix to use on an alternate computer when they work remotely. And those are the major ways that we're helping all modelers get a fresh start by planning for good. So with that, I would like to, now we can transition over to Brendan and get to the question and answer session. We'll open it up for Rich, Ryan, and Stephen, but if there's any questions that are about Quantrix, Brad, Tom, and Brendan can answer those as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Brendan.
Great, thank you, Tom. I just want to echo the thanks that this has been a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, we have time for a quick question. And so I know that we've already touched upon this, and it's been shown in the presentations earlier, but we've seen how Quantrix fits into the process at LogCapStrat. And we've seen some like the canvases and dashboards that you've shown with Quantrix and how then it goes into Tableau. So I guess I'm wondering, how are you sharing your work with your clients? And so I don't know who the best person to answer this would be, but when it gets to that time, is it through canvases? Is it through Tableau? So what are like the clients seeing at the end of the process?
I can take a stab at that. You know, it depends on the client. In both of the examples that Stephen and Ryan went through, we're delivering it through. We turn over the full ecosystem. So you know, they have Quantrix licenses, and they run Quantrix locally on machines at our client. They'll also have access to the Tableau, either their own Tableau server or we'll make it available to them. They also get the Python code. They also get any SQL procedures that we've done. So we try to push it over to them in as complete a fashion as possible. That said, you know, there are certainly scenarios where you know, there's a need for a more succinct Excel output, and Quantrix exports to Excel you know, very readily, and you can create an Excel workbook and import the key inputs from Quantrix, and you can kind of maintain that for broader distribution if folks don't have Quantrix licenses. Like, for example, we had a scenario where one of our clients was going to a syndicate of banks and bankers, and they need an Excel model. That's just the language they speak. So we export the Quantrix model into Excel, have all the formulas functional in that Excel model, and then that's free. You copy paste values for the inputs from Quantrix, and they've got a fully functional Excel model.
And Rich, we also use the cloud too from Quantrix as well.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah, we do.
Yep,
so, and it's
right.
pretty well used as well. So it's great. And from having built the Excel model that Rich is referring to, it took a lot less time in Quantrix than it did in Excel.
Good to hear.
I know we're getting close to the end of the time, so I'll just mention that if anyone watching now or is watching later on a recording, if you have any questions, please send it to us, and Tom will be sharing in a second our contact information. We'll do our best to get you that answer. So thank you again, and I'll hand it back to Tom.
Great, thanks, Brendan, and thank you to the presenters and our guests, and to the folks that submitted questions. It was a pleasure to have you on our Planning for Good episode today. So our asks of you or action items for you is please take advantage of this Planning for Good program in series. You can find out more by going to this website here, this link, to find out about our Planning for Good series, or contact us at customerservice@quantrix.com. We'll help you take charge of your organization's future. And stay tuned to our webinar series. We'll have another one in late September, another exciting episode of Planning for Good. I thank you all very much for tuning in today, and thank you again to our presenters. Have a wonderful day and a balance to your week. Thank you for tuning in.